Akedah Project.
We invite you to join.
One story, many angles.
Come learn with us.
Ki zoiche kalanish kuchoi satu imeo hilam. V'ein shikhu lifnei kisei kivoidachu. V'akedas yitzchak lezaroi. Hayoim berachmim etiskoid. Buri chatu adoinoi. Zoiche raberis. For you remember all that is forgotten, and there is no forgetting before you. In the Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, may you remember today for his descendants. This is the blessing part, the final part of Zichronot, which is the second of the three additional prayers and blessings that we say on the Musaf, on the prayers of Rosh Hashanah, of the New Year. Since I was really young, and since I figured out the translation of this, so to speak, and what this really means, and where I grew up, in the Hasidic community I grew up, these three additional parts, additional blessings of the Musaf, Malchiyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot, were a big deal. And here we have this blessing, this prayer, and we are invoking the binding of Isaac, a story that along Shaluach Haken, where we have to take away a bird from her eggs, and along with several other parts from the Torah, always really bothered me. But specifically on this day, specifically on the New Year, when we are trying to invoke mercy, we're trying to ask in many ways, at least in today's traditional circles, we're asking for forgiveness. And what we remind ourselves, what we remind God of, which just a few paragraphs after that, the prayer says, if we are like kids to you, have mercy on us, like a father has mercy on his kids. Is this what we are thinking about? A father sacrificing his son for what he believed to be his beliefs? Regardless of how we look on this, wherever we relate to this story as the way I relate to it, as a story that is written down to teach us something, or for those who see the story as something that actually happened, whatever and however you relate to it. The fact that this is what we're looking for always struck me the wrong way. And the whole story, really, Avram, really? Is it a message that we want to give as Abrahamic religions, to use a more maybe academic and popular term? Is this what we glorify? Someone who would sacrifice his own children because he thinks, or even if it's true, that this is what his religion requires? To me personally, that message became even more personal when I came out to my dad. I came out to my dad as a woman of trans experience, a trans woman, 5 years ago. And after a lengthy conversation, which you can all find in my book, Becoming Eve, I go into more detail of how that went down. My dad told me, I'm never going to be able to talk to you again, because I'm going to live as who I am. What was so interesting to me was that I spent an hour with the help of a friend, a rabbi, a colleague. We were really talking to him in his language. We got to a point where my dad admitted that trans people could exist. Still, he felt that God, or whatever he believed in, could not add up with accepting his own child. Way too often the story of the Akedah, the story of Yitzchak, the story of Avram saying that, oh, if this is what God wants, then I'm going to sacrifice my own child, constantly comes to mind. And it's something that not just I cannot accept, it's something that I don't think anyone should be able to accept. I've been on a crusade, so to speak, over the past few years to focus on LGBTQ acceptance in general, but specifically within Judaism. And I always tell people, I don't care what your religious beliefs are, I don't care what your practices are or are not. By the end of the day, what I want people to know is that if they want to find their place in Judaism or in whichever religion or practice or spiritual practice or religious practice or cultural practice they feel, they should know that they can do that with their full selves. They should know that there's a space in Judaism not just to accept LGBTQ people, but to celebrate, not to tolerate, but to celebrate. And then we look on a story like the Akedah and it rubs us the wrong way for many of us. Something that I grew up with also, though, was always, I would say, on the back burner, so to speak. It wasn't discussed too much, but it's something that the earliest records of it that I could find is an 8th century poem, but also something that I think exists very much in many Hasidic teachings, which is that the test, the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, was supposed to be a test. Literally, it starts, Vu Elohim nisa et Avraham, the story of the Akedat Yitzchak, which we also read on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And there is an understanding of that story, or that the message, the Musar Haskell, the message of that story is always supposed to be that Avraham failed. He was supposed to speak up. When he hears a message from God or from the divine to say, go and sacrifice your child, his response was supposed to be no. And it's not just me saying that. Many, many scholars, many rabbis and spiritual leaders throughout history that have seen this story like that. And to me, when I look on it on that way, the message of the Akedah, the message of the binding of Isaac, the message of a father being ready to sacrifice their own child for what they believe, becomes actually very positive and very strong. Personally, I don't see God as the boogeyman in the sky. I think the God that I grew up with was very much the God who was going to get really angry if you flip a light switch on Friday night, and he was going to punish you. A God that, quite frankly, is contrary to not just a lot of Jewish religious beliefs, but also against very Hasidic beliefs. But it is the God that has been used to control people for so long. Instead, we see this story as something that, oh no, Abraham got this wrong. There are some times that we need to stand up, we need to speak up for what's really right, to not protect not just our loved ones, but everyone, to speak up for a vulnerable group, to speak up to a group that so many are literally ready to take and sacrifice. When we say, remember today the binding of Isaac, we are not just trying to say, and to me, that's what the story is saying. And the reason why we keep remembering the story and how the Akedat Yitzchak, the story of the Akedah, became so much an existential part of who we are is because it sends a message that regardless of how spiritual we get, regardless of how strongly we get involved in this story, in our religion, we need to remember this story. There's the part in Ayom Harat Olam, Im Kevanim Rachameinu Kerachem Av Al Banim, which is right after the part that I said in the beginning. If we are like children, have mercy on us like a parent has on children, where sometimes we need to even ignore what we think is our divine calling to do what's right by people. Because at the end of the day, one of the most important messages of Rosh Hashanah ends up being that it's the day the world was created. Whatever, again, personally I see this as a metaphorical story. Whatever you see it as a metaphorical, literal story. There's a message of every year we need to retell this story a few times a year of how far off an own parent could go when it comes to their kids. Because we need to remember the part of what really happened, where the divine voice speaks up to Avraham and says, Al tishlach yadcha elana. That's the part that we need to remember. Do not put out your hand to harm anyone. That is a message for me personally. It refers to the LGBTQ community. I know it's something that I've personally had to witness with what it means for a parent to reject the kids. But I also know as a parent myself, I know that regardless of my beliefs and what I relate to, there is nothing that my own child could do that I would ever say, okay, it's time to sacrifice that child. As a community, we need to know that when we think, oh, there's a fringe of our community, maybe we need to sacrifice them for the so-called greater good, the message is quite the opposite. These are the people that we need to take care of even more. That is a message of Akedah Yitzchak, flipped on its head maybe, but at its core could just as well be what it was really meant. Let's keep that in mind. This Rosh Hashanah, this new year, whatever you are doing, wherever you are, however you are, keep in mind the people who are way too often sacrificed by those who think they speak in the name of God, of the divine, whatever that is. Because in the name of our own divine, we need to speak up for them. We need to scream out, and our response has to be, Hineni, I am here to speak up for you, to fight for you in every way that is needed.